I've been making ambient music for nearly 4 years. I had no clue what I was doing when I started out, but I had a lot of fun. Just holding down a chord and finding a sample and drenching it all in reverb plugins. It sounded like garbage, as does most music by inexperienced teenagers. I had no clue how to end songs, and I thought I had soundscapes deep enough to be lost in for 20 minutes when, in reality, you'd get bored with them after 2. Before I made ambient music, I was a drummer for various emo projects that would last one practice session and disband forever. Ambient was a genre that I was intimate with, but was outside of my comfort zone as a drummer. Drone and ambient are genres that are harmonically and timbrally focused. They attempt to get you lost in a soundscape, submerging you in the atmosphere it provides, and nothing grounds and clarifies a piece more than rhythm. There was no way that anyone could keep an incredible atmosphere whilst also having a 4-on-the-floor beat going. That would be a contradiction. It could ruin a piece, or at least that's what my teenage brain thought. I was a very opinionated kid at the time. If you talked to me, I would say things like, I know what I'm going to do with the rest of my life, or I totally understand Hegel. I was going around saying all this stuff in confidence, thinking I was a genius, and thankfully no one else around me in Ohio cared that much about ambient music, because they would have asked me if I have ever heard any ambient music from Germany and then would hit me with the entire genre of dub techno and ambient techno, and I would realize just how much of an idiot I had been. If we really want to get into the thick of it with techno, we could look at all of the subtle differences between dub and ambient, looking at things like tempo, sound design, influences, stuff like that, but I'm not an expert on that, and I'm bound to piss off some techno fans no matter what I say when it comes to these genres, so I'll just keep it brief. Ambient and dub techno are subcultures of techno that proved my younger self wrong, taking the soundscapes and atmospheres of ambient and combining it with the repetitive electric sounds of techno. This merriment of ambient and techno is an odd idea, one music meant for dancing at clubs and the other for people looking to fall into soundscapes. However, both genres revel in repetition. Ambient has always thrived in repetition, using it to create a soundscape that is realized and developed enough to get lost in through the process of repeated melodic figures and textures that become normal and soothing over a long running time. And techno is repetitive by its very nature, creating an atmosphere more appropriate for dancing by normalizing segments through repetition, grounding pieces with heavy basses and kicks, encouraging dancing. It is a shared element in what are two different genres. The only thing that now needs to be done is to blend the two well. Find a way to make contradictory elements work together in a way that keeps the original goal of both genres whilst also forging its own path and establishing its own ideas. Basic Channel is the most recommended dub techno for people to get into the genre, but once you listen to BCD 1 and 2, most people find themselves in the dark about where to go next. Thankfully, I was pointed in the direction of an incredible comp of ambient techno that anyone could dig into after listening to BCD 1 and 2. Coppice Halifax's Static Pharming Year 1. This compilation is made up of an entire year of work, consisting of 12 EPs and a bonus ambient album. You get about 5.5 hours of music on this comp, each EP offering its own world to enter and explore. Brian Granger calls the music he makes in Coppice Halifax impressionist techno. As pretentious as that sounds, I think it is a fitting way to describe his sound. It takes up the impressionist obsession with achieving emotion through sound and texture to wondrous effect here, painting these horrific places with his sound. I like to think of this compilation as an exploration through a series of rooms, each room holding a new monster, failed experiment, or sign of life. Most of the songs on this compilation depict interactions between two contrasting elements, the repetitious drums of techno and the never-ending unconnected soundscapes of ambient. This is how Granger deals with the contradictions in ambient techno, by leaning into it and making that the central idea of his works. In most of these songs, these two elements are at war with each other, with the percussion looking to keep the ambient atmosphere grounded in structure, and the ambient parts wanting to move as they please, tied to nothing except the running time of the song. They can work together on occasion, but most of these songs either start or end with the drums beating the ambience out, or the ambience swallowing the song whole. The ambient work here is wonderful and oh so expressive as well. With dub techno, there's always that risk of being very one note, with the artist not having the ability to really milk and explore ambience for its multiple emotions, typically just staying with a soundscape that can either be hauntingly beautiful or very scary and never really expanding outside of that sound. Thankfully, Granger is experienced enough to use ambient to its fullest capacity. These soundscapes are varied and are all executed perfectly. From the sounds of monsters in tracks like Glassed, with the entire song having to deal with this hulking giant, working around it rather than with it, and having the ambience win and swallow the song whole, and in Haza, with its drones peering around a corner, the sounds of liquids reverberating over the atmosphere as if it's moving, following us. These tracks always have the most dynamic interplay between the percussion and ambience, with the drums either brutally killing the drones or with the drones swallowing everything. It feels like we're in a room holding some kind of monster that we can't fully comprehend. It's so dark and horrific, it's some of the most dark dub techno I've ever heard. When the drones are not these monsters that the drums must either tame or die trying, the drones float around above us. One of ambient music's obsessions is the sound of tape. It is a gorgeous warm texture, but what ends up happening is that the high end gets sacrificed to achieve that sound, leaving an entire world of frequencies completely empty, which makes drones more warm, but that ignored high end leads to less of a weight and space within the ambience. Thankfully, that problem is not found in tracks like Empty, with the white noise and pads floating above the drums, soaring above everything, giving the track a nice top weight to it. Codyne is quite similar to Empty. The ambience fills the room, rising to the top, becoming more and more prevalent, ending the piece by enveloping everything. If the first set of ambiences were monsters, then this set of ambiences is steam. They float high above everything, untouchable to the drums, which try to contain it until they are fully overwhelmed. The final broad ambient category I would give this album is that of the living ambience. The more we explore these rooms, the more alive we find them to be, constantly growing and shaping themselves in new ways. Tigress is the best example of this, in my opinion. The start feels like we're being swarmed with insects that back away as soon as the bass drum comes in. We hear these reverberated sounds plinking and plonking in the distance. Something is moving in this room. There's this constant drone that's haunting us, but that's not the main focus of the piece. It's these two synths that are trading off with each other every half note. The track molds and morphs itself. The drone gets louder, the percussion changes up, the sounds in the background get louder and more frequent. The drums work best with the drone on here, working with the ambience rather than fighting with it. It feels so warm compared to the other icy tracks we had before. It's easily the most alive track on here. Instead of having monsters or steam, we have all these rats crawling around, constantly changing its position, just being out of your field of vision, but never out of theirs. Though the album has all of these different ideas that it is exploring with the relationship between atmosphere and rhythm, there are overall shared sonic elements. The comp has nearly the same kick drum sound across all tracks, with the difference being minor, not all that noticeable. The differences never really end up being timbral, but with volume and effects added onto it. This is more of a nitpick than anything else because the kick always gets its job done, but the kick is a very important part of this compilation. The kick is on nearly every single track, completely present. It's the protagonist in our story, or maybe the antagonist based on your interpretation. It's trying to comprehend, to consolidate the drones, these free moving and morphing sounds, to something that would make sense to someone who's grown up with Western music, the quarter note. Ambient music has become very common in modern culture with the birth of new age music and people just trying to relax after a long day of work. But still, ambient music is not something that is really comparable to pop and dance music. It's this free-flowing thing that doesn't really have anything to control itself, and the quarter note is actively trying to control it. A quarter note is probably the most common thing within Western music. The pop, 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 pop is prevalent in every top 40 song now. The kick is key to letting us understand this compilation. It lets us understand the story that is taking place of coming into contact with these inhuman sounds and trying to comprehend them in a way that we can relate back to our familiar knowledge, with these attempts, of course, being futile or rarely succeeding. This is why I think that so many tracks end with the drone overtaking the percussion, and rarely having the kick win out, and when it does, it's deafening and powerful, like at the end of Hot Guns and Pink Sugar. The soundscapes all have that signature ambient techno sound, clean, mechanical, and overwhelming, choosing to subvert the typical warm sound that ambient often goes for and embracing the robotic sounds that a synth can bring. That cold and human nature works wonders and is dynamic enough that they can be listened to for 20 minutes without risk of losing interest. These tracks develop slowly, but they do develop. Bass drums overtake ambiances swallow percussions whole, synth figures fade in and fading out inside of the drone, giving it more life. Field recordings cast a dim light in these dark rooms that we're exploring, only adding to the terror. The rooms that we enter in this compilation are constantly changing, even if we don't consciously notice it. We subconsciously find ourselves able to listen along with these songs and move with them, being able to keep interest in what appears to be stationary. There are so many great little details in this compilation that I couldn't get into. It's one of the best explorations in dub techno that I have ever found. It's also 5 hours and 30 minutes long, so I'm not going to be able to cover everything here, but I highly recommend checking this compilation out. It's a collection of sci-fi horror short stories in musical form, with a brilliant range and emotional quality. If you're looking for a launching point after listening to Basic Channel 1 and 2, this is perfect for you. This compilation is up on Bandcamp. I put the link in the description. Go ahead and give it a listen, maybe buy it. It's really worth it. I really fell in love with this compilation. If you liked this video and you want to have access to these videos earlier, you want to have your name in the credits, or if you want to be able to hear my commentary tracks on these videos, go ahead and donate to my Patreon. Thank you so much for watching this video. I love you. Have a good day.